Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine stepping into a massive, sweltering concrete arena. You're standing shoulder to shoulder with thousands of people, and your boots are literally sinking into the grime and the mud. You are exhausted, you are completely starving, and you're being forced to look down into the sand to watch two literal, superpowered gods fight each other. The air is just thick with the smell of sweat and ozone. But here is the absolute worst part of all this. Imagine screaming your lungs out for the very people who oppress you. Why would you do that? Well, simply because their security forces are tossing little scraps of bread and electricity rations at your head. It is a brilliantly insidious way to manufacture consent. You see, you aren't just observing their power, you're actively participating in a system that degrades you. Today we're exploring the absolute terrifying extreme of a rigged societal system by looking at the anatomy of a fractured dystopian society exactly as it's laid out in the source material for Victoria Aveyard's novel, Red Queen.
Section 1. Survival on Extreme Mode, the Mud and the Micro.
To really understand this meticulously engineered world, we've got to look at the nation of Norda, and specifically a slum called the Stilts. It frames this whole society almost like a really cruel video game. Think of the oppressed class, the Reds, as playing on extreme permadeath survival mode. They live in these ramshackle houses built directly above a muddy riverbank. It's August, the heat is absolutely suffocating, and the people are defined by bent backs, starvation, and red blood. They literally don't have a single weapon or resource. Now contrast that with the rulers, the Silvers. They stand unnaturally tall, totally untarnished by the world around them. They bleed silver, and they possess these terrifying superhuman abilities. We're talking impossible strength, blinding speed, mind control. Essentially, they are playing in a sandbox mode with every single god-tier cheat code already unlocked.
The protagonist of our story, an 18-year-old Red named Mare Barrow, makes this brilliant observation about the divide. She says, "Silver blood itself is a threat, a warning, a promise. You can never be them." You know, in most unequal societies, there is at least the illusion of a ladder, right? You can kind of tell yourself that with enough hard work, you might climb your way out of the mud. But in Norta, the divide is biological destiny. The ruling elite weaponizes their biology. They cement this narrative that they aren't merely a privileged political class. They are literal deities. I mean, you can argue against an unfair tax policy, but you absolutely cannot argue with genetics. And this brilliantly illustrates a classic authoritarian tactic, dividing the oppressed class from within. Just look at the stark contrast between Mireille and her 14-year-old sister, Giza. Mireille is a cynical pickpocket. She doesn't have any marketable skills, so the state categorizes her as an idle resource. And that means she's facing mandatory military conscription the second she turns 18. But Giza, she is an apprentice seamstress, spending her days embroidering intricate silk flowers for silver elites. Because she serves the vanity and luxury of the ruling class, she gets granted the status of an essential laborer, which makes her completely safe from the draft. The system is designed to ensure the Reds are so focused on competing against each other for scraps of favor that they never unite against the Silvers.
Section 2. Gods Playing in Sandbox, the Theater of Subjugation.
Now, if the Silvers are essentially bulletproof magic users, you might be wondering why they even need to aggressively enforce their rule over the Reds at all. It comes down to the simple fact that power requires constant validation. And that brings us to the First Friday feats. Every first Friday of the month, Reds are crammed into those massive concrete arenas we talked about to watch two Silvers fight to severe injury, and all this violence is broadcast on huge digital screens. The text describes a specific match between a physically unstoppable strongarm and a physically unimposing Whisper. A Whisper is a Silver who can control minds, and the Whisper doesn't even throw a single punch. He simply invades the strongarm's mind, completely bypasses all that physical muscle, and forces the giant man to plunge his own sword directly into his own stomach. Up in the cheap seats, Mara can literally hear the metal cutting through flesh. It is a profound, sickening violation of autonomy.
Which leads us to a really vital Socratic question. If you have mind control, super strength, and high-tech weaponry, why make a massive public spectacle out of it? Why not just use a quiet, invisible secret police force to disappear dissidents in the middle of the night?
Well, the answer is a tactic called performative subjugation. Think about it. If you crush dissent quietly, the oppressed population might still harbor this dangerous illusion. They might think resistance is just a numbers game, that if they just gather enough bodies, they can overpower the guards.
But by dragging everyone into the glaring daylight and forcing them to watch a terrifying silver warrior get effortlessly destroyed by another silver, you induce a state of learned helplessness on a massive, societal scale. It teaches the Reds that physical resistance isn't just difficult, it is biologically futile. And by actively bribing that starving crowd with bread while the carnage happens, the state actually forces their active complicity.
Section 3. The Military Meat Grinder. The True Cost of the Joke. So, if you survive the arena and you aren't an essential artisan, your ultimate fate is the military draft. Non-essential Reds are deployed to the choke. It is a dead, gray wasteland of endless trench warfare, where a permanent fog of smoke literally blocks out the sun. The horrific, emotional toll of this meat grinder is anchored by this tiny but completely devastating sensory detail in the story. Mare's father is confined to a wheelchair, missing a leg and a lung from his time in the choke. When a letter arrives from Mare's brother at the front lines, her father sniffs the paper and immediately says, "Pine, not smoke." He knows instantly, just from the scent of the paper, that his son has been temporarily rotated away from that constant, suffocating cloud of ash. It's just a deeply human, haunting realization of the constant peril these people live in.
And honestly, this reveals a glaring structural contradiction. Nortan has electricity, air jets, massive digital screens, and incredibly advanced medical capabilities. Yet, despite possessing literally all of this innovation, their primary military strategy relies entirely on primitive trench warfare. They are putting thousands of teenagers in the mud to act as human shields for the Silver Kings and Queens who are sitting miles behind the lines.
So why on earth do they fight like this? Because, as the source text makes brutally clear, Red lives are cheaper than bullets. The Silvers absolutely have the technology to build automated defenses, but they would rather use a constantly renewing, entirely disposable supply of biological armor than risk their expensive, futuristic machinery.
Section 4. The Economics of Rebellion. Choosing the Impossible.
Up to this point, Mar has really just been surviving by keeping her head down. But then, her closest friend, Killorn, has his entire world shattered. His master dies, and going back to our video game metaphor for a second, Killorn's only save file just got permanently deleted. He's now doomed to the draft. This desperate situation forces Mar to plunge headfirst into the black market, and that's where she meets Farley, an operative of the Scarlet Guard. Just picture her. She's a hardened rebel outlander, sweating in the summer humidity, openly carrying an illegal firearm, and wearing this very distinct red sash stamped with suns. Farley isn't some flawless, benevolent savior figure. She represents the harsh, cold reality that real revolution requires serious logistics, bribes, and resources. Good intentions aren't enough. Farley demands a fee to smuggle the two teens out. That fee? 2,000 crowns. To put this astronomical number into perspective for you, Mar steals pennies and rusty batteries just to survive the week. 2,000 crowns could feed her entire family for years. It is a literally impossible sum. She might as well have asked for 2 million. But Mare, she doesn't even blink. Despite that astronomical number, she makes a reckless, highly emotional promise to Killorn. We run. Leave everything to me. In this exact moment, we witness her crossing the Rubicon. She transitions from a passive, non-player character into an active participant. She is choosing a 1 in a million sliver of hope over the absolute, terrifying certainty of the meat grinder. She decides she would rather die trying to cheat this rig system than passively march into the mud for those silver gods.
Section 5. The War's True Purpose. The Existential Realization.
Let's zoom out completely for a second. The feeling of navigating an uncaring, rigged bureaucracy actually connects directly to the true architecture of Norda's society. The text tells us that this brutal trench warfare with the Lakelands has been raging for an entire century, supposedly over borders and watermills. But think back to the incredible technological advancements and god-tier magic the Silvers possess. They have air jets. They have people who can move massive objects with their minds. Which sets up this terrifying logical contradiction that I want to leave you with today. If the Silvers are genuinely so powerful and so technologically advanced, why hasn't this war ended in 100 years? What if the true, unspoken purpose of this endless war isn't actually to defeat the enemy at all? What if the war is just a carefully manufactured meat grinder designed specifically to cull the red population before their sheer numbers can ever multiply enough to overwhelm their silver gods? The idea that the ultimate tool of control isn't the arena, but the war itself, leaves us to seriously question the deeply entrenched structures in our own world.
Keep asking the hard questions, keep examining the systems around you, and we'll catch you next time.